You're listening to Around the Valley on KMVR, the voice of the valley, where content is king, broadcasting from high above the end of the Santa Fe Trail in beautiful downtown El Monte. Sheila Crippen, Marketing Director for the El Monte South El Monte Chamber of Commerce, is on assignment this week, and she will be back with us next week. Sean Tellis, Assistant Editor for the Mid-Valley News, is sitting down with your host, Kenneth Ferreira, and we're here to celebrate the events and activities occurring throughout the San Gabriel Valley. We got two rules on this show. We try to keep it entertaining. We try to keep it interesting. Previous topics over the last few weeks have included Temple City's Camellia Festival, City of El Monte's Principle for a Day, and we try and wrap it all up with information on how you can take advantage of local resources. This week we'll be having conversations about school fundraising programs and El Monte City Council's support for homeless veterans. Before we move into this week's programming, I'd like to remind you that this portion of our programming is sponsored by Ramona Property Managers Incorporated, a professional property management company proudly serving the San Gabriel Valley since 1960. If you would like to sponsor Around the Valley, please feel free to contact the Mid-Valley News at area code 626-453-1753. If you have any questions, comments, or you have an event you would like to promote on our show, you can contact Sean Tellis with the Mid-Valley News at area code 626-453-1753, or you can check out our website at www.kmvr.net. You can also send us an email at atv@kmvr.net. One of the stories we have been following over the last couple of weeks that Sean was fortunate enough to cover was the 70th anniversary of the Assembly Center at the Santa Anita Racetrack. Santa Anita Race Park was opened on December 25th, 1934, and it is the oldest racetrack in Southern California. In its heyday, the track's races attracted such stars as Betty Grable, Lana Turner, Edgar Bergen, Jane Russell, and Cary Grant. 1942 racing at Santa Anita was suspended due to the Second World War, and the Santa Anita was used as a Japanese-American internment center with up to 17,000 people being held at the Santa Anita racetrack. With me today is Sean Tellis, Assistant Editor of the Mid-Valley News, who covered this story, and you can read more about it on the Mid-Valley News. Sean, tell us what you found out.
Good morning, Ken.
Good morning. How have you been?
I've been really well. It's nice to see you again. So this is a very interesting story. It's a tragic story. It's a fascinating story. But the first thing I wanted to mention is it's called an assembly center and not a detention center. And for some people, it's the same thing. For some people, it's different things. So it's just good to know. The assembly center technically is the location where Japanese Americans were initially forced to go. And once the internment camps were built across the U.S., the people were sent from the assembly center to the internment camps.
Well, you learn something new every day, and I thank you for that, Sean. Now, I noticed the article in this week's edition of the Mid-Valley News is pretty extensive, so I imagine that you have several things you'd like to fill us in on. Tell us about your experience in researching this article.
Great. Well, yeah, I was very lucky to have the space in the Mid-Valley News to tell the story. That is pretty extensive, and a lot of people don't realize the history of the Japanese Americans in the San Gabriel Valley. There's an article online written by PCC professor Susie Ling that talks about the history of Japanese Americans in the San Gabriel Valley and kind of touches upon their work in wholesale nurseries, vegetable farms, fruit stands, and it's not, in addition to being workers in the fields, they were also owners of businesses and that type of thing. And so, these truly are American ancestors. And if you go to a lot of local museums, which was another great thing that came out of this story, I was able to visit the San Gabriel Historical Association lecture. There was the El Monte Historical Museum, La Historia Museum, the Arcadia Historical Museum. They have great things, in general and specifically about this history. So like you mentioned, when World War II broke out, initially America wasn't involved. What got us involved? Pearl Harbor. Now, as soon as Pearl Harbor happened, you had a lot of Japanese Americans who were getting nervous because, they had a long history here, but at the same time, we're living at a time where a lot of Asian Americans didn't have the same rights as other people, and it turns out they had very good reason to be nervous because after Executive Order 9066 was signed, that basically locked in the fate of Japanese Americans for, until the end of World War II. And what ended up happening is they decided that Japanese Americans, for lack of a better description, couldn't be trusted. And so they said, guess what? You have a week to get your stuff together and get to these assembly centers. I think initially they were given the choice to go, and then ultimately they were forced to go. So if you can imagine, you have a house, a business, you have a week to sell it, to get someone to watch it. Everyone, there's positive and negative stories. The negative stories are people got taken advantage of, had to sell their house, had to sell their business. There are positive stories that neighbors watched these businesses and homes for years and years and gave them back.
Years.
So I've heard both positive and negative, but once you got to the assembly center, you could only go in, well, you could carry, and I heard a lot of people saying, they lost a lot of family heirlooms, and if you can imagine, what you can carry is not very much.
Well, you can't carry the family furniture.
Exactly, and especially some cultures. Every culture has emphasis on history, but Japanese culture, especially, a very long history and a lot of family heirlooms that go hundreds and hundreds of years, and so that's really sad. On top of that, we're talking about American citizens.
Right.
We're talking about it shouldn't happen to anyone, but especially in America, right? There's a great story. Well, I'll get to that in a second.
Were you able to see layouts, like aerial photos or layouts of what the detention center was like? Can you see the racetrack still there? Can you see?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Arcadia Historical Museum, which is across from the Arcadia Commerce, Chamber of Commerce, which is across from the Arcadia Chamber of Commerce, has a section all about this assembly center. And they do have an aerial photo there, which you can find in the Mid-Valley News this week. They also have something really beautiful. It's art, these little birds that were created through basically found objects, wood, wire, and these were objects that Japanese Americans created to kind of help themselves get through. So next to this artwork, there is a plaque that describes this Zen Japanese concept, which means enduring what seems unbearable with dignity and grace. And there was an art exhibit that had all types of art that had been found after the war in these internment camps. Because, there were skilled artists that went to these internment camps or detention centers. And you were in the middle of nowhere, and you were completely in a foreign environment and being treated in a way that, that's offensive, And so people created art to help deal with these things. And
well, you basically got rounded up, shoved in a little campsite with whatever you could fit in your pockets, and you find some wire, you find some wood, put them together, make something. Standard concept. You try and make the best of bad situation to keep your sanity.
Right. And on top of that, I recently went to a lecture from the San Gabriel Historical Association where they had, we have people who are alive who've been through this experience, and they had two gentlemen talking about it. And one of them said, few people realize once you're in the internment camp, they made everyone sign a piece of paper that had two choices. It was basically, do you pledge to be loyal to the United States or not? That's a very, very difficult question to ask people when you're imprisoning them.
Right. And you had one of two choices. You could sign the paper or you would get deported. Yeah. And I've talked to a number of people actually that were so infuriated and became so disenchanted with the American dream that they chose not to sign the paper, took their entire family with absolutely nothing but what they could carry in their pockets and moved back to relatives in Japan. Yeah. And it wasn't until one or two generations later, their daughters, their granddaughters, where they actually came back to California. Right. And they carry these stories of, they don't really have, if they weren't alive or some of them were just so young that they didn't really understand their parents or their grandparents' anger. But it's fascinating to get that side of history.
Right. And then, I've also heard that there was an internment center that was specifically for people who wouldn't sign the paper and didn't want to go back to Japan. So there's all these different stories and versions. And one of the interesting parts of doing the story is, Japanese culture is very respectful. It's not a complaining culture.
No, it's not.
And so you talk to people who've been through this, and they're so gracious about their experience. Which doesn't mean that they had a gracious experience.
Right.
Right. And someone was
They're almost apologetic about it.
Yeah.
Almost.
And it's true because actually I heard a man spoke who he went through the detention center and then decided, there was a troop of Japanese Americans who banded together and actually got to fight in World War II. This was later on. and they're the most decorated troop, as far as I understand, the most Purple Hearts, because they were doing some serious, serious work for the United States of America after being detained, and this man who is a hero started his speech by saying, "Thank you for accepting a person who has a face like mine to speak to a group like you." And he's the hero, right? But he still had that kind of, like you said, apologetic viewpoint about his ancestry, at the same time that he's an American World War II hero. And which is just one very small point of a whole speech that he gave. It really broke my heart to think that these things that have happened to Americans are still affecting the way we view ourselves and the way we think people view us.
Oh, sure, sure. Well, it's the same old story. If you want to know where you're going, you got to look at where you've come from. And we've heard the cliche a million times that those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. Moving forward, I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase this question. How these people that you spoke with, and I imagine you spoke with more than one, because like I said, your story in the Mid-Valley News is so extensive and so detailed. I'm really impressed with what you did with that article and that topic. Did you get a sense of how time has changed their viewpoint? Was time able to give them any sense of perspective?
Yeah. Well, I think this ties into that question. I was speaking to a gentleman who was detained or interned, and he told me, it's not our culture to be angry about it, but the people who are younger than us, the next generation, the generation after that, are. And they're the ones who are coming to us and saying, this isn't right, we need to tell people about this. And I think it's true. There are some stories that are happening. I think USC this year decided to give diplomas to all the students that were forcibly removed from the university during that time. So I think there is that kind of change in perspective of the younger people saying, no, we're not going to accept this. We're not going to graciously say, oh, that was the past. It was understandable. It was a war.
I want to talk about the photo that's on the front page of the Mid-Valley News.
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked me about that. There's a photo in the Monte Historical Museum that is kind of hidden away, and it's this beautiful panorama of some kind of agricultural field in Arcadia. And there's Japanese words at the bottom that have never been translated. It speaks to the history of our local history, Japanese Americans and our local history. And which reminds me, there's a photography studio in San Gabriel. It used to be owned by a man named Toyo Miyakate, and it is now run by his grandson, Alan. Toyo was interned, detained, however you want to put it, and he snuck in a camera. And he's one of the few Japanese Americans to actually take photographs of that experience. And he has those photos in his studio in San Gabriel. He produced a book with Ansel Adams called Two Views of Manzanar. And Manzanar is a very famous detention center. So there's a lot of local history in our area.
Well, thank you, Sean. I hope we get some follow-up, or I may have some follow-up questions in the weeks to come. So I definitely appreciate you, again, putting that extensive article together.
One last thing I did want to add is the Santa Anita racetrack does have a plaque on its grounds remembering not only the Assembly Center, but also they did training there for soldiers, and it's kind of a historic World War II site, so I'm glad they have that. As tragic as the past is, it's nice that it can come full circle and we can celebrate Japanese culture at that location.
You're listening to KMVR, the voice of the Valley, where content is king. We're trying to keep it entertaining, we're trying to keep it interesting, and we're going to keep moving along to talk about some other events and activities occurring throughout the San Gabriel Valley. Sitting with me is Sean Tellis, assistant editor of the Mid-Valley News, who puts some miles on his shoes as he gets around the San Gabriel Valley, so it's always a pleasure to speak with him. This portion of our programming is brought to you by El Monte Convalescent Hospital and Skilled Nursing Facility on Easy Street in El Monte. El Monte Convalescent Hospital and Skilled Nursing Facility has been family-owned and operated since 1964. If you have any questions about the services they provide, please feel free to give them a call at area code 626-442-1500. If you have any questions about sponsoring around the Valley, please feel free to call Mid-Valley News at area code 626-443-1753. One topic that's near and dear to my heart that I always appreciate talking about is libraries, especially throughout the San Gabriel Valley. And I wanted to inform our listeners that the Norwood Library is announcing a science presentation on bubbles that will take place on Saturday, March 31st, 2012 at 3 p.m. Be talking for an hour about the scientific magic of bubbles, along with some jokes mixed in. That'll be occurring at the Norwood Library, 4550 Peck Road in El Monte, California, 91732. More questions, feel free to give them a call. Area code 626-443-3147. One of the reasons that caught my attention is, if you think about it, bubbles are pretty scientifically magic.
Bubbles are amazing.
There's a lot of different things going on with a bubble. There's surface tension, there's air pressure. So check it out at the Norwood Library here on Peck Road in the city of El Monte.
You know, little known Sean Tellis fact, I was a mad scientist. There was a job I had teaching science to kids through a company called Mad Science. And it was an after-school program, and I remember teaching something about bubbles and polymer, and you get kids in a chain and you move them all around, and it shows how things can stretch, and chemistry. And so, yeah, and also libraries. You know, the Mid-Valley News has a local library news section. So get your hands on one of those Mid-Valley News copies and look for that, because there are amazing free events happening in San Gabriel, Temple City, Rosemead, El Monte, South El Monte, all over at these libraries that people sometimes forget to investigate.
Can you give us two locations of the many that hold the Mid-Valley News? I can think of one right here at the Mid-Valley News offices at 11401 Valley Boulevard in El Monte.
That's great, right next to Goodies, which also has Mid-Valley News. You know, there's a place in San Gabriel called La Casa Community Center, and they provide a lot of services for the community, including AA, childcare, and they have them as well. So those are two great places to check out the Mid-Valley News.
You know, I was noticing that the San Gabriel Mission High School's Media Studies Department held its 5th annual film festival on March 15th in 2012. And I noticed that there were several different categories. I just wanted to go over the winners here for anybody who's interested. For short movies, in first place was a movie called Stuffed by director Marina Torres. Music videos, first place was Good Vibrations by Isabella Gutierrez, a junior at the San Gabriel Mission High School. Short movies junior high category, first place went to Missing from St. Ignatius Elementary. Students that are the members of the Media Studies program are the ones that run the school's television station, MTV Mission Television, and they produce up to 30 episodes of their programming each year. That might be some place we want to reach out to if they want to do some radio work.
Yeah, I would love to check that out. You know, I've always had a dream of having a San Gabriel Valley Film Festival, because there's a lot of talent here, you know, and there's some great things that should be shared among many people. And fun fact about Mission High School, you know, it's an all-girl Catholic high school in San Gabriel, but it used to be co-ed. And I forget what year that stopped, but I want to say 60 or 70. But in their high school, if you go in and check it out, there are photos of men's Letterman's jackets from the Mission High School. That'd be a great item to have way around town.
I love the history that walks around this show. Just every now and then you look in the nooks and crannies of our conversation and little things like that crop up. That's why we're here at Around the Valley. That's what I mean by celebrating the events and activities that are occurring through the San Gabriel Valley. Sean, did you have anything on your agenda or anything on your schedule that you wanted to bring up?
I wanted to talk about a party I went to. There was a party at the Hilton in San Gabriel, and yes, there is a Hilton in San Gabriel. It was sponsored by a group called San Gabriel Educational Foundation. It's called San Gabriel Educational Foundation, or CEF, and they had a party called Cephalapalooza, and they actually raised over $40,000 for their educational programs. It's called Fund the Gap, you know, which is pretty much self-explanatory, funding the gap between what schools need and what they're given. The executive director of CEF, her name is Cheryl McPhee. She did a great job of working, you know, with parents and the board, and they had a silent auction, they had a live auction, which the city manager of San Gabriel led. Great dinner, fun time, dancing. You know, I never knew people in my city could get down like that, but it was fun to see. Chin Ho, who's a board member and, you know, among other things in San Gabriel, won a contest he won the live auction to sing with the band. And he chose to forego singing with the band, but come up and sing a cappella, God Bless America. And it was an experience I will not forget for a long time.
Necessity is the motherhood of invention. And it's very heartening and promising to see that as the budgetary cutbacks are really starting to sink their teeth into the different educational levels, how creative some of these administrators and teachers are getting in bridging that gap. The other thing I like when I hear stories like that is I'm also very impressed in how the community is rallying around these fundraisers.
It's true. It's really nice. Something else that CEF is doing is they offer summer school classes. You pay for these classes. What that means is you get the class that you want, and they're actually raising money for funding the gap as well, and you get credit. So they've just recently opened up their catalog for the summer. So if you're interested, check that out. Temple City has a similar group, and they had a talk last night about school budgets because these school budgets are huge. And sometimes you hear about how many millions of dollars they have, and you say, well, why does my $5 or $10 count? Why should I give $100 to something that has $100 million? And just learning the history and the laws behind how schools are funded and how school districts get money really did help to understand why it's more important now than ever to get involved. And if anything, give your local school a call, see how you can help them out. Because like you pointed out, Ken, it's important for the community to be involved because then you're actually feeding a need instead of just stabbing in the dark.
Three basics of life are food, clothing, and shelter. I would almost add one more to that, and that would be education. I don't think you can really have a chance to live to your potential just as a basic human being unless you know how to read, unless you know how to write, and I mean with halfway decent grammar and arithmetic.
It's true.
You should know how to add, you should know how to read, you should know how to write.
One day I hope to learn those things.
You and me both, brother. You and me both. Moving on, speaking of housing, I wanted to talk about the commitment to curbing homelessness among military veterans, how the city of El Monte and Mercy Housing, with support from a lot of local veterans throughout the San Gabriel Valley, are making tremendous progress in laying the foundation for a construction of a 41-unit affordable rental housing project here in the city of El Monte. Now, they're running into some obstacles. The project did receive approval from the El Monte City Council last October. The council directed city staff to move forward with negotiations to acquire land and design schematics. The council also approved a purchase and sale agreement to acquire the parcel of land, which, if you're familiar with the city of El Monte, is at the corner of Stewart and Ramona. This all occurred back in November. Next, an application was submitted to the Los Angeles County Community Development Commission, and in January, the project received the highest score possible after going through the industry fund's Notice of Funds Availability process. But here's where we run into the red tape, is that the county's Community Development Commission got back to the city of El Monte that the industry funds are on hold due to the elimination of the redevelopment funding. With the tax credit application that's due on March 22nd, the city of El Monte will need the commission to release the industry funds to move forward. So this item is on the County Board of Supervisors Tuesday, March 20th agenda. That is 9:30 a.m. at the Kenneth Hahn Hall of Administration, Board Hearing Room 381B, located 500 West Temple Street, Los Angeles, California. So for those who are unable to attend but are very interested, public comments may be submitted to the following email address. Well, I tell you what, it's a pretty extensive email address. We'll get that up on our website at www.kmvr.net. Please look for our show notes, or you can always email us for more information at atv@kmvr.net.
I'm glad you brought that up. Homeless veterans is a serious issue, and a lot of people, when they see a homeless person, say, well, they're from someplace else, they're from downtown LA. I was recently at a talk in Whittier where they did a research study. They walked up to a lot of homeless people and said, do you mind if I ask you some questions? The majority didn't mind. They asked them just basic things. What's your name? Where are you from? Your medical history, these kind of different things. And it was fascinating and disheartening to learn that most of these homeless people in Whittier are from Whittier. And I would imagine the same thing is true in El Monte. The same thing is true in San Gabriel. We need to take care of our local homeless population because they are our community. They are people who grew up with us. And when you factor in veterans and the sacrifices they've made, they deserve special recognition and special support and, customized programs to help them.
And with so many Iraq and Afghanistan servicemen and women that are coming home from deployment, the need for veteran housing, especially in the San Gabriel Valley, because let's look at it. Southern California is really the place where people come to make things happen. Just by sheer numbers, there's so many people from here, they return here. The weather is outstanding. And with the returning of our servicemen and women from deployment, there is a great need of veteran housing throughout the San Gabriel Valley. So again, one of the things we try not to do here on Around the Valley is get political, and I believe that veteran housing is an apolitical topic. I would still encourage our listeners to at least attend or pay attention to what's happening with the Board of Supervisors meeting, because this directly affects the community of El Monte, and more importantly, it directly affects the ability to provide housing to veterans in need. Well, that brings us to the conclusion of our show this week. It's amazing how fast these things come around. I got to tell you, I didn't get to cover nearly half the stuff I had written down in my show notes today. Time flies when you're having fun. Sean, I wanted to thank you once again for your time. I always appreciate sitting down with you. It's a blast. We get into these conversations and you never know what's going to come up. Little bits and pieces of Americana, of San Gabriel Valleyana crop up. And it's just always a great time. I look forward to our conversations and our celebrations of events and activities occurring throughout the valley in the future. And I hope you'll be able to keep that seat warm and that mic hot. You're listening to Around the Valley at KMVR.net, where content is king. We are the voice of the valley, and we do encourage you not only to support our show, but also call in with ideas of your own on what you would like to talk about. You can reach us through the Mid-Valley News at area code 626-443-1753. We also have an email address. That's atv@kmvr.net. This is Kenneth Ferreira, your host for Around the Valley, thanking you, our listeners, for listening, and we look forward to our topics, celebrations of activities and events in the weeks to come.